Good evening, Mingo. So good to see you tonight. I'm so glad to be back here tonight. You just can't believe how thrilled I am to be back here. I tell you what, you go off with your wife for 4 or 5 days and you get to thinking, ain't there something back home I'm supposed to be taking care of? And so I'm so glad to be back here with you tonight. And Mingo family and friends who are with us online, we're so glad you're back with us here tonight. We hope you're cool where you are. And just remember this, if you were alive yesterday, you need to remember this, if you were alive yesterday, you survived the hottest day on recorded history. You lived through it. Is right. So, now, I don't know how they know that, but they say they know that. How long they been keeping how hot it is on record? 100-something years. It is now 2023. That's just in this side of history. 100 years out of 2,300 years, and they think they know. Well, let's keep on. Anyhow. We're glad you're here with us tonight, and before we get started, let me take a moment to say thank you to Deacon Alfred Jackson for being here last week and filling in. I've heard a lot of wonderful things, how much they appreciate Alfred's leading us last week, what he did a great job, and I do appreciate that. And let me remind you also, we are in the process of putting together our list of candidates to fill 2 positions in our deacon ministry. List went out Sunday, right, Josh? And if you would not like to be considered, that is, you'd like to have your name deleted from this list because for some reason you don't think you can serve, you need to let one of our deacons or our deacon chair, Mr. Noah Jackson, know. Because on Sunday, April 27th, we will have in morning worship the deacon election. As said, we need 2 individuals to serve in this capacity. Staff Sergeant Josh and Head Technician Mr. Leslie are the 2 who've served the past 3 years, and their time of service is coming to an end. They'll be rotating off. But I've twisted both their arms. They still got to do the work, but they don't get the pay or the title. They're going to continue doing what they do here at the church. And Josh is the only one who laughed at that. I appreciate that. So want to make sure you keep that in mind. And then we got the big event Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock. I don't know how they talk kids into doing this. We're having a back-to-school party, pool party. Debbie and Keith, they graciously consented to let us use their pool, and so at 3 o'clock that afternoon, we're going to get together, and we're going to let the kids have a big time and get them all ready to run and jump on that school bus and to get to going. I've seen a few of my teachers who've gone back and get to working already, and they weren't jumping up and down celebrating. I might have to get them out there Sunday afternoon and get them to frolicking in the pool. Maybe their attitude will get a little better about the start of school. So just keep those in mind. August is getting past us and September's around the corner. But let's get to what we're supposed to be doing tonight. We're in the book of 1 Samuel. We had covered chapter 30, but I want to go back and do just a little bit of review. We're looking at the life of David. And things are coming to a head, as we say around here. David started off, and he was a shooting star as a young man. He goes down to the army camp where his brothers are to deliver goods. Goliath is standing in a valley between 2 hillsides, and he is challenging and belittling the God of Israel and King Saul's army. David goes out, you know that story, and then all of a sudden, overnight, David is a national hero. David also had been anointed by the prophet Samuel to be the king who would succeed King Saul. And so here's a young man. Everyone in the nation knows his name. National hero. He in his heart knows God has got him to be the next king of Israel. And man, life is looking good, especially for a young man, maybe 18, 20, 22 years old. And then everything goes south. King Saul loses his mind. He goes into a manic state. His insecurity and his jealousy of David leads him to try to kill David. And then he makes David an outlaw. And for a long period of time, David has to leave his home, has to relocate his family. And he's between Israel and the Philistines, trying to hold on until Saul is replaced and he becomes the king. Very trying time. Very difficult time for David. Very difficult time. He was a man without a country. He was a wanted man in his own country. The Philistines wanted him dead. He was constantly looking over his shoulder. And then we come to 1 Samuel chapter 30. And David has a group of 600 men. They too were men who were on the outs with King Saul. They were men who were not happy with the way things were going in Israel. And they banded together to try to endure this difficult time. And they banded voluntarily under David's leadership. And then these men who were happy to follow David turn against David. They want to kill him because while they're out on one of their ventures, the Amalekites come to their camp in Ziklag, kidnap all the women and children, steal all the livestock, and when David and his men return back, everything's gone. The men want to kill David. They want to blame him. And David is barely hanging on. You know, here he is gone from being national hero, everyone loves him, to this point, not one person is speaking up for him. A lot of folks would have loved to see him dead. Go to verse 6, please. 1 Samuel 30, verse 6. Now, here's what I want to show you. And here's what I want us to see in our study tonight. You remember that famous fictional character, Forrest Gump, right? Okay. And everyone thought he was what? Stupid, right? And what was his response to the people who asked him if he was stupid? Stupid is as stupid does. I want to borrow that phrase, and as we look in chapter 30 and 31, I want to change it about and say, a king is as a king does. We got a contrast going on here. We got a contrast. David's not king yet. He's not king yet, but people are looking to him for leadership. And in a time where it couldn't get any worse, David demonstrates the leadership capabilities and the leadership needed to lead a nation. He's just leading a group of 600 men. And he is at a point where he's not sure if he's even going to live through that. It is dark. It is desperate. But David doesn't take it personally. He does not abandon his morals or his values. He does not abandon what God has showed him. You know, God makes us promises, but sometimes our circumstances seem to contradict God's promises, or his promises seem to be contrary to what we're going through. Here's a case in point. Verse 6. Women and children are gone. All the livestock gone. The men have cried themselves till there's no more physical strength. They want someone to pay for this. They want someone to make it right. And David is the one who stands up and says, okay, this is what we're going to do. Moreover, David was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him. People were embittered, each one because his son and his daughters. But, notice the contrast here. We can understand how these people are reacting to the great loss that they have come through. David has suffered the same losses. But notice this. These people want to stone David. They want to drown in their misery and their pain. How does David respond? David does not cave into his pain or to the temporary circumstances he is going through. David seeks to find a source of strength and guidance in God. Instead of blaming God, God, where are you at? God, what's going on? David says, okay, Lord, what shall we do? Verse 7. David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, please bring me the ephod. And so he brought the ephod to David. Verse 8. David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue this band, that is the Amalekites who came in and stole everything? Shall I overtake them? And he said to him, pursue, for you will surely overtake them, and you will surely rescue all. All right, hold it right there for a moment. Interesting here. When human beings get in a crisis, one of our first responses is, someone's got to do something. What are we going to do? I don't know, but we got to do something. That's as wrong-headed as can be. It's the natural human response thinking, I need to do something to change this. And the odds of that doing it and changing it are very, very, very slim. Reminds me of the old joke the late comedian Bob Hope said. He said he was on an airliner one time and they hit some very rough turbulence. Looked like the plane was going down and people were scared and crying. And someone hollered out, somebody do something religious. Bob said, I'm going to. He says, I took up a collection. Before David goes charging off, he asks God, is this what we should be doing? Is this what we should be doing? And he gets his answer. Now, go to verse 18, please. All right, here we go. David didn't lose his head. He kept his cool. There's an expression I know some of the military men in this room have heard. Others in their capacities have heard. And it is this. In a time of upheaval or crisis or not knowing, go with what you've been trained to do. Let the training kick in. That's what David did. David let his religious training, his spiritual development kick in. He asked God, what shall we do? God shows him. He pushes through all the difficulties. And it says here, David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken and rescued his 2 wives. Because he didn't lose his head, he let his training kick in. He did not cave in to the pressures or the pains of the crowd. He went through what he knew he needed to do. Here's the end result. The result they were looking for. Result they were looking for. Verse 19. Nothing of theirs was missing, small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken for themselves. David brought it all back. Another interesting little sideline here is this. People want explanations. Just like when they first discovered women and children are gone, everything's been stolen. And, all right, what are you going to do? Look to the leader. What are you going to do? What's your plan? What are we going to do? And when you say, well, first of all, I think we need to stop and pray, that's when they lose it. Are you kidding me? It's time for action. What are you going to do? David said, we're going to inquire of the Lord. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. Not the most popular answer at the moment. But what's that expression? Wisdom is justified. What's that expression? Someone help me here. Wisdom is justified. We'll have to Google that one. But what I'm driving at is this. Telling you what I'm going to do is not going to get us anywhere. Doing what God leads us to do is going to get us to where we want to be. He shows them that. David brought it all back. Verse 20. David had captured all the sheep, the cattle, which the people drove ahead of other livestock. And this is where another point of his demonstrating king-like leadership. The people at this point have done a 180. Have done a 180. You know, it's mobs are frightening things, and sometimes they are very, very comical. Very comical. It's amazing how quickly a mob can change and turn. I'll give you a little example. Many years ago, pastor in Clinton, Dr. Leonard Henry, he's a Christian pastor now, played football at Clinton High School, went on and played at East Carolina University, played professional football in the Miami Dolphins. When Leonard was at East Carolina, East Carolina played Carolina, Chapel Hill. I went up to the game. And Carolina had a quarterback. I wish I could remember his name. He ran out on the field. He got booed right off the bat. There was another quarterback on the bench, and everyone else thought was the quarterback should have been playing, but the coach put him in the game. First down, lost yards. The boos got louder. Second down, lost more yards. The boos were literally deafening. It's third down and an impossible amount of yards to make a first down. But guess what? He did it. He did it. Then all of a sudden, didn't hear a boo. The place went bonkers with cheers. In a matter of moments. Get that bum out of there. He doesn't know what he's doing. Get him out of here. Yay! Put him back in, coach. He's doing great. This crowd who wants to blame everything on David, all of a sudden, yeah, David, I knew it all along. I knew David would get this done. Matter of fact, we're going to let him have pick of the litter here. He gets the pick of the spoil. Now, they were men who took back from the Amalekites, and so David was to be rewarded. But here's a little subtle thing I want you to see in the way David responds. Go to verse 21, please. With David, 21. With David came to the 200 men who were too exhausted to follow him. Remember in the story, 600 men, 200 men were physically and emotionally depleted, and they couldn't make the journey. 400 go. The 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David, who had been left at the brook of Bezor, they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. Then David approached the people and greeted them. Verse 22. Then all the wicked and worthless men among them, those who went with David, said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them anything of the spoil, so that that which we have recovered, except every man his wife and his children. and they need to leave the camp. The mob mentality is sticking its ugly head back up again. And so now that the wrong is over and we got everything back, well, let's wait. Let's hold on a minute. There's those 200 fellows over there. They didn't do their part, so therefore we're not going to give them anything. They ain't had the wives. We don't want the wives and the kids, but they get the wives and kids back, and they got to leave. They've got to leave. Verse 23. David stands up to the mob again. You must not do so. Who? The words here, brothers, is not an accident. This mob is thinking like every man for himself. David is making a monumental statement here. This is not every man for himself or the survival of the fittest. We're a nation here. Granted, we're a nation in turmoil, but we are a nation. They're Israelites. They're our brothers. And so we're not going to treat them the way that you think we ought to treat them. Now, notice David's very specific language once again. Everyone in the camp is saying, David did this. David said, God did this with what the Lord has given us. I didn't give this to you. God gave this to you. He's kept us and delivered into our hands the band that came against us. Verse 24. And who will listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down the battle, so shall his share be with who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. Verse 25. So it has been from that day forward that he made it a statute, an ordinance for Israel to this day. David is not the king, but he is ruling like a king should rule. We're not a mob. We're not a lawless mob. We're Israelites. We're the people of God. These are our brothers. We're not going to slide anyone. And the way we deal with one another is going to reflect our knowledge of God and His law. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. And David, notice this, even before he's king, invokes a policy that those who serve this country, whether they are a cook in the mess tent or they're carrying a rifle on the front line, they're all a part of this army. No one will be slighted because their position was deemed not as important as someone else's position. David is reminding these people something very important. They're citizens, not thugs. Our country's lost that tonight. And as a result of it, we're in big trouble. We don't see ourselves as fellow citizens, a part of the same country. We're encountering thugs, every man for himself. At a very critical time, David recognizes this and says, no. And he institutes this policy. But something more important is going to happen here. Something far more important. Now, you and I know from hindsight that David becomes the next king of Israel. But before David became king, he had to win the hearts of all the people. He had to win the hearts of a deeply divided and troubled nation. And this is one of the episodes where the people really saw David's character, his leadership. that it wasn't about him, it was about the nation, and then it was about the testimony and the reputation of God, and he started winning support. Very critical time. Very, very critical time. And it's at this point, this chapter starts off by no one standing up with him. And it concludes with the mobs turning back into a nation and saying, we're following David. He has our support. He has our support. He's not king yet, but he has acted like one. Now, let's go to chapter 31, please. What a contrast. What a contrast. Chapter 31. Now, the Philistines were fighting against Israel. And the men of Israel, what? Fled from before the Philistines fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Powerful statement. A very revealing statement. Now, who's the leader of the army? Saul. He's deranged. He is not mentally capable of leading an army, but he's leading them. And he is not thinking about the army or the nation. He's thinking about himself. Just the opposite of what we just saw in David. Just the opposite. Now, 40 years earlier, Saul was a great military leader. Saul knew what he was doing back then, but his jealousy and his paranoia and other things kick in, and it all becomes about Saul. You've seen this scenario over and over and over in history when a great leader loses sight of his people and it becomes about his legacy or his reputation. Who suffers? The nation, the people do. And in this statement, now, don't think that I was smart enough to have known this, because I wasn't, and I had to do a little bit of research. And in this area, the plains around Mount Gilboa, from the historians who understand this period of history and understand the geography, this is the last place you want to fight the Philistines. Because the Philistines had chariots, and they were a very mobile army. Very, very mobile army. And the Israelites went out there and they were sitting ducks. They were sitting ducks. It's not exactly the same, but Saul's led them into an ambush. He's put them in a position where anyone knew we're going to get massacred out there. Little Bighorn, we're fixing to get massacred out there. We're going to walk into their strengths, and we're not going to be able to answer it. And it's never a good thing when you see an army running away, is it? That's what's going on here. Verse 2. The Philistines overtook Saul and his sons. Now Saul has 4 sons. 3 are at the battle. 3 are at the battle. Jonathan's there and his 2 other sons. Verse 3. The battle went heavily against Saul. Nobody's surprised. Here's the king, the commander of the army, and he has put himself on a field of battle where he's an easy target. The archers hit him. Archers hit him. He's badly wounded by the archers. Verse 4. Saul's dying. He's wounded, heavily wounded. He's dying. He looks around him. Most of his army's dead. The remaining bulk are running away just to save their lives. Saul knows this is my last day on earth. And he says to his armor bearer, draw your sword, pierce me through with it. Otherwise these uncircumcised will come and pierce me through and make sport of me. But his armor bearer would not, because he was greatly afraid. So Saul takes his own sword and he falls on it. Verse 5. When his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. In verse 6. Saul died with his 3 sons, his armor bearer, all of his men on that day together. What a contrast. At Ziklag, where the Amalekites came in and took everything and took off, it looked like it was going to be a slaughter. But David sought of the Lord, and we see the results there. Saul, I promise you, did not consult with God before he went into this battle. He did not listen to the sound reasoning of his military leaders. He is a man on a mission about him, and he just leads his army into one of the biggest fiascos that a king could lead his armies into. Dark, dark, dark day. Not but one of the darkest days in the history of Israel. Their first king. Remember, this was a nation who told God, give us a king. Give us a king. We want a king. Saul was the one. Now, go to verse 7, please, sir. When the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley with those who were beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the cities and fled. And what happened? Philistines came and lived in them. Those of you who are familiar with December the 7th, 1941, after the Japanese had decimated Pearl Harbor, what was one of the biggest concerns of the nation, especially of our military? What was one of the immediate concerns and fears? The entire west coast of the United States was exposed with very little military might to defend it. A lot were afraid that Japan could just come on and land and take over. That's what these Philistines did. The army has no leader. It's every man for himself, running away to hide, and the country is left exposed and open, and the enemies are running over them, taking over the cities. Look at verse 8. Came about on the next day, the Philistines came to strip the slain. They found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. Verse 9. They cut off his head, stripped him of his weapons, sent them throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to their people. Now hang on there just a minute. What's the significance? What's going on here? What's going on here? The man's dead. Are you going to make him any more dead? Is that the issue here? What's the issue here? The man who epitomized the strength of Israel, Saul. Why would they decapitate him? To prove not only is he dead, but his strength, his power, his wisdom, gone. Gone. And showing that the Philistines and their gods are superior to Saul, his army, God of Israel. To humiliate them. Humiliate them. I wish I could remember exactly. Was it Somalia? Where was it? We sent some troops in, and we weren't really prepared. We sent our troops in there, and terrorists killed a couple of our soldiers and dragged their dead bodies through the streets and was on every TV camera around the world. Now, our concern is for those two men that bravely lost their lives that day. But the world doesn't remember their names, but the terrorists weren't concerned about this. They wanted a United States soldier in uniform being humiliated and dragged through the streets, challenging the power of the great United States of America. That's what's going on here. Verse 10. They put his weapons in the temple, and they fastened his body to the wall there to show the complete and utter defeat, not just of Saul, but of Israel. Of Israel. You see, Saul personified Israel. Saul personified Israel. And what does this do to the people of Philistia? It emboldens them. It gives them a confidence that maybe they were lacking. And so they're thinking, hey, we're going to have our way here. And more importantly in this, is not just a military thing, it is a religious thing. They're believing their God is superior to the God of Israel. That's what they're looking at. All right, we want to wind this up. Now, the Bible says something. This is marvelous. It's a tragic story, no other way to spin it, but this is marvelous. When the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, verse 12, the valiant men, not those who are just running away, but the valiant men rose and walked all night, walk into enemy territory, take the body of Saul, the body of his sons from the wall, they bring it back home to Jabesh and burn them there. Verse 13. They took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh and fasted for 7 days. These men knew what the desecrated bodies of Saul and his sons were doing for the enemy. And they very bravely go in there and take them down, bring them back. Now, once again, this title, Jabesh, the title of an ancient city. Once again, defer to the historians. 40 years prior to this, this is where Saul begins his reign as king. And the Ammonites had gone into this city and looted and robbed and killed. And Saul went in and avenged that and made the city safe again. 40 years later, these people hadn't forgotten what he did. And they bring his body back to give it the burial that it should receive as king of Israel. As king of Israel. At Ziklag, David is rallying the people to be the nation of Israel. They are. Here, even in defeat, the people are doing the same thing. That this has been a dark day, maybe the worst day in the history of our country, but Saul's dead. This has been a horrendous event, but we're going to pay homage to Saul, and then we're going to move on. We are going to move on. One of David's first and biggest challenges to become a king is to take a country that has been running and fleeing in fear and say, put the brakes on. Let's mourn our dead. But then let's get back to being who we are, and let's set things the way they are. David does that. He does that. In my lifetime, I've seen my country have to do the same thing. On the days following September 11, 2001, when we were humiliated and all kinds of horrible things in the eyes of the world. And the world had parties because America was on fire. But we needed leadership to stand up. Let's mourn our dead. But then we're going to put our uniforms back on, and we're going to unite this nation. We're going forward. David does that. David does that. We're going to pick up there next week. Let's look at our prayer list tonight. Want to continue to hold up Mr. Robert Autry and his brother Tommy. Sir? You're good. Is that true, Susan? I'm going to put a mark through Tommy's name right here. Tommy, you are marked. All right? We're continuing to lift up Gloria Carroll. Want to continue to remember her. Stanley Beasley, Wanda Bryant, Jeff Core, little Adeline Cottle, Judy Drawhorn, Paula Garris. Has anyone had an update on Paula? Remember, she's got the little baby coming that has a heart defect. Has anyone heard from? Okay. Continue to pray for Kenny Godwin and Wayne Hall. We're holding up Sam Holland tonight, hoping we'll give some information about something that will help her with her abdomen. Let's remember her, Charles, and the baby. Gina Hollingsworth. Carolyn Hudson's been through the mill, hasn't she? I left the hospital, I thought, hey, this is a breeze. She's going to be great. But I'll tell you what, it's one step forward, two steps back. So let's remember Carolyn tonight and Norman. Janie Hughes, this is Kathy Mitchell's mom. Keith Sutton's mother. Continue to remember Summer McKeeson, Kathy Mitchell, Helen Rogers, Linda Stewart. Pastor, how's your wife tonight? Okay. Praying for Grayley Thornton and Betty Tyler. Kathy Tyndall is needing some surgery, so let's remember her in JW. Seth Wise and Morgan Williams. And of course, we want to continue to remember our homebound members. We remember Willa Baker, June and Edna, Sybil Norris down at the beach, Dickie and Doris, Hazel and Melanie. Melanie's doing great. She's hoping that her physical therapist will release her. And Miss Louise Vaughn. Others we need to remember tonight. Gabby. Is he? Remind me of his last name. Okay, all right. Well, let's remember that little fella. Okay, all right. Okay. That's right, Mary Beverly. Yes. She is coming along. Spoke with her yesterday. She sounded a whole lot better yesterday. Sounded a whole lot better. And others? Billy McCullough. Yes. Billy had a procedure, the ablation to short circuit some extra heartbeats going there. He deals with AFib, but they did 2 ablations yesterday. He got back home today, doing much, much better. So let's remember Billy and Ginger and the family. Want to pray for our fellow countrymen in Hawaii who've lost everything. I got thinking about that. When catastrophes happen here, obviously we think about rebuilding. But when you rebuild on an island, the logistics of getting all those materials delivered there, that's got to be a monumental Herculean task. You live on an island and you got to bring literally everything in. That is something else. So let's hold them up and remember those there. Anyone else? Pastor Lewis, would you lead us as we pray together tonight, please, sir, remembering these names and these situations?
Dear Lord, we are thankful for the Bible study tonight and the information that we received. We ask you bless us. We have so many that have been listed. Lord, we can't list them all by name here, but you know each one of them, those that are undergoing procedures, those that are recuperating from procedures,
Yes.
those that are homebound. We just ask you to be with each and every one of them. Be with the people of Hawaii. That one's also suffered after the storms around Raleigh and Durham overnight. And just be with all the people that are in harm.
Yes.
Lord, we just ask you bless. Bless the ministry of Mingo Baptist Church. And watch over them in the days to come. Ask that you be with us and give us traveling mercy. We pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, everyone.